Recording in progress.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to MassINC's annual Gateway Cities Leadership Summit, Growing an Inclusive Economy. I'm Juana Matias, COO of MassINC, and I have the pleasure of kicking off today's exciting programming. Our conversation today focuses on what we must do throughout the Commonwealth Gateway Cities to foster inclusive and equitable economies. Look, inequality is a significant threat to sustainable economic growth, human development, and social mobility. In a post-pandemic world, as we consider what the future holds for our gateway city economies, we must recognize the need for bold change to combat growing inequality in all its forms, including addressing the needs of entrepreneurs of color. This past March, MassINC published new research in partnership with the Coalition for an Equitable Economy. The report, titled Unleashing the Potential of Entrepreneurs of Color in Massachusetts, details a plan to position inclusive entrepreneurship as a central strategy to achieve stronger and more equitable gateway city economies and close harmful racial wealth gaps. As the report details, we must do better to ensure that entrepreneurs of color have access to skills and social networks, capital and financial resources, and customers and markets. We can accomplish this through local, cross-sector collaboration, capacity building, and private and public investments. But we must do all of this in a culturally and technologically competent way. We hope today's timely conversation generates broader support for state policy and productive local action that leverages this moment to advance inclusive entrepreneurship throughout the state, particularly in our gateway city regions. Before we get into today's program, I want to take the time to thank our wonderful sponsors: Eastern Bank, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, Mass Development, Mass Mutual, Enterprise Bank, and Trinity Financial. Your valuable support makes today's conversation possible. Thank you for your commitment to building inclusive gateway city economies. Now, we have a packed program for you this morning. We start with brief keynote remarks and a data presentation, followed by our panel discussion and a question, answer, and comment session. We absolutely want to hear from you, the people doing this work day in and day out. So please feel free to include your question in the Q&A function, chat, or raise your hand to be called on when we get to that portion of today's program. Lastly, we will close today's event with remarks from the co-chairs of the Gateway Cities Legislative Caucus. Now, please join me in welcoming Daylana Irvin Parker. As the Director of Budget and Supplier Diversity at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, she is responsible for creating programming that helps diverse vendors build capacity and sustainability. She recently was named by Diversity Plus magazine as a 2021 Top 15 Women in Power Impacting Diversity. Daylana, we are honored to have you here with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction, Lana. I also want to give a special thank you to the MassINC team for inviting Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts to be part of this critically important conversation about growing an inclusive economy. Good morning, everyone. As Juana said, I am Daylana Irvin Parker, and I am the Director of Budget and Supplier Diversity at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. I am excited to be here with you this morning. Blue Cross has been partnering with MassINC for many years, and we are proud of this long-standing relationship. MassINC's commitment to standing in the gaps and bridging small and diverse businesses with economic opportunities aligns with our values at Blue Cross. Just like MassINC, we are committed to creating opportunities for these businesses and being part of the solution to growing an inclusive economy. It is this commitment I will take a few minutes to speak to you about today. Our CEO, Andrew Dreyfus, has made diversity, equity, and inclusion a corporate imperative. Under his leadership, at the direction of our Chief Diversity Officer, Stephanie Brown, Blue Cross has developed the 5C DEI framework that is fully integrated into our business strategies and operating model. The 5C stand for career, which addresses how we recruit and retain a diverse and inclusive workforce. The second C is culture, which ensures that we are taking steps to be a culturally competent organization. Commerce. It is important that we are integrating DEI into the products and services we offer to our members and those that we buy from suppliers. Next, we have community. We are building deeper relationships in the community through the lens of DEI. And finally, we recently added a 5th C for care, to address racial disparities in healthcare and ensure that our members are receiving equal care. This 5C framework also informs our procurement practices. For over 20 years, Blue Cross has had a supply diversity program in place with a mission to procure products and services from diverse suppliers. We understand that these procurement opportunities create economic empowerment, sustainability, and jobs with the diverse businesses we partner with, and in the communities we serve, like the gateway cities. We have procurement policies in place that ensure diverse representation in our supply chain. For every RFP that we put out to bid, we require diverse vendor participation in the process. Last year, we saw many diverse businesses, particularly those owned by people of color, adversely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of them went out of business at unprecedented levels. We also saw on full display the systemic racism that continues to create barriers for people and businesses of color. In response to this, Blue Cross went deeper. We know that diverse businesses fuel the economy and create jobs, which is why Blue Cross expanded its procurement policies and implemented transformative practices that create even more access to contracting opportunities. We are now asking our suppliers to demonstrate their commitment to supply diversity. And we are doing this by putting language in our contracts that require our largest suppliers to subcontract with diverse businesses. It is also important for us to understand whether suppliers participating in the bid process share the same values for supplier diversity and DEI as Blue Cross, and to then factor this information into the vendor selection process. While Blue Cross has made great strides in our supplier diversity efforts, we have not done this work alone. It takes a village to build a more inclusive economy, and partnering with allies is critical to building relationships with small and diverse businesses. Organizations such as the Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council and the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce Pacesetters Program help to connect companies like Blue Cross with diverse businesses. Blue Cross continues to deepen its relationship with diverse suppliers, but we know we have more work to do. We share in the collective responsibility of ensuring equitable and equal opportunities for diverse businesses, which is why we are excited to be here today. The esteemed panelists we'll hear from today are allies in moving the needle forward. These amazing women have shifted the ground, knocked down barriers, and created opportunities for small and diverse businesses. I am excited to hear and learn from them as they share their insight and experiences. Now, with that said, I will turn it back over to Juana. Thank you.
Thank you, Delina, for your inspiring remarks. You captured what we must all keep in mind. To build inclusive and sustainable economies, we need the collective participation of private, nonprofit, and public sector partners. Only then will we be able to leverage this moment to drive equitable growth. Delina, thanks to you and Blue Cross Blue Shield for your leadership and commitment to this important work. Now it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague and partner in crime, MassINC's Gateway Cities Innovation Institute Executive Director, Ben Foreman. For over a decade, Ben has been a leader on Gateway City issues, and today he will present some new data to help ground our discussion of the issues. Ben, take it away for us.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm just pulling up my screen for you all to see. Does that look good? For those who aren't able to join us back in March when we released our inclusive entrepreneurship report, my presentation this morning to help frame our conversation will sound a bit familiar, but please do bear with me because we're going to have some new data to share on entrepreneurship in gateway cities. All of that data back in our March report, we're looking at entrepreneurship at the state level. And as I prepared that research, I kept thinking about what it would mean for gateway cities, the trends that I was seeing. And I'm almost ashamed to admit this today, but at the time, I wasn't aware that the rate of new business formation was falling in Massachusetts. And obviously, if you're not producing new businesses, if entrepreneurship is on the decline, that has real implications for regional economic development. New business growth is critical to productivity, to vitality, to job growth. So I mean, this is an indicator that we've got to keep a close eye on. We'd always understood that gateway cities weren't growing new niches and clusters of economic activity, but we always chalked that up to proximity to Boston. Boston has the tendency to suck in entrepreneurial energy, we know, casting what economists call an agglomeration shadow over neighboring regional economies. But it turned out that we had given that explanation way too much credence. At both the state and national level, the number of small business starts has been trending down. This is explained in part by technology and industry consolidation and businesses moving toward the coasts. Certainly the internet eliminated the need for a lot of bookstores and record stores and video stores and the like. But economists have shown that changing demographics is also a very significant contributor to the downward trend in entrepreneurship. Despite Shark Tank and all the attention we're giving entrepreneurs these days, we don't have as many as we had in the past, simply because our white population is declining and people of color don't have access to the same opportunities and capital that they need to successfully grow and launch new business enterprise. So in this chart, which gives the data for Massachusetts, you can see that the number of new starts each year has fallen by about half since 2005. In the national data, which go back even further, you can see that the trend is longer and sharper. Here it looks like this was mostly a factor of the Great Recession, but that is not the case. It's a much longer standing trend. Now, entrepreneurs of color are increasingly starting new companies or trying to start new companies in Massachusetts, and without a question, that's very much a silver lining, but they remain dramatically underrepresented in the Massachusetts economy. You can see in the data in this slide that the number of Black and Hispanic residents working in their own incorporated business has grown a lot in recent years. However, this growth is from a really low base, and white residents in Massachusetts are still twice as likely to own their own business. Until we ensure that people of color who start a business have access to the networks, to the capital, to the markets, every business needs to succeed, it's going to be really difficult to close this large gap. When we look at tech industries, entrepreneurs of color are especially underrepresented. And this is critical because these advanced industries draw new wealth into our regional economies. And the extent of this problem is visible in this slide, which showed data from the SBIR SSTR grants. This is the largest federal grant program for small businesses who are working to commercialize new technologies. And they're a good set of data because they give us the race and ethnicity of the entrepreneur. And we can see that in the orange bars here that over the time period we have these data, they go back to 2005, our population has become significantly more diverse. But the number of entrepreneurs of color who are getting these grants to start companies in advanced industries has actually fallen over time. This is just one indicator, but one we ought to pay attention to, a very significant concern. Of course, entrepreneurs don't need to start companies that invent new products to contribute to regional economic growth. Mom and pop businesses can provide good jobs, keep dollars circulating in our local economies. Data show this kind of livelihood entrepreneurship reduces poverty and closes harmful racial wealth gaps. If you just look here, Hispanic residents, for example, that own their own businesses in Massachusetts have twice the annual income. Whether they're leading tech businesses or Main Street businesses, it appears that the state's entrepreneurs of color are actually underrepresented in our gateway cities. This chart here gives you one view of that. It shows gateway cities are home to a larger percentage of all the state's businesses, 27%, than they are of state designated minority-owned businesses. They have just 21% share of businesses led by people of color. And when you consider that gateway cities are home to a much larger share of the state's non-white population, this disparity looks even greater. Fully 42% of the state's people of color live in a gateway city. But again, just 21% of designated minority-owned businesses are located in these communities. These metrics, I think you could use to look at where your community is in terms of its competitive place attracting and creating businesses owned by people of color. I put them in the deck here so you can look at them, but just briefly, this index shows, one would be balanced representation, minority-owned businesses relative to each city's share of business establishments. And again, one would be balanced representation, minority-owned businesses relative to each city's share of the state's non-white residents. Finishing up here, when we released our March report, we challenged the state, along with the Coalition for an Equitable Economy, to look at the untapped potential of entrepreneurs of color as an enormous opportunity and develop an aggressive strategy to close gaps in business ownership by the end of the decade. A strategy would have a three-pronged approach that looks at all the three essential ingredients to business success: skills and relationships, access to capital, and access to customers and markets. In the discussion this morning, we'll talk a lot about what gateway cities can do to support state policies in each of these areas, but we'll also hear about what can be done at the local level. This is especially critical because entrepreneurial ecosystems grow at a regional scale. This is where you provide direct business assistance, access to growth capital, you develop the regulatory structures, a lot of them anyhow. You especially foster a culture of innovation and inclusion. And perhaps most overlooked and most important, this is where you produce the talent. Research suggests for inclusive entrepreneurships, it's not a recruitment and retention strategy, but rather intentional efforts to build the base of the pyramid with early exposure, socialization, education, internships, apprenticeships, early leadership roles. Entrepreneurs aren't born, they're created by access to these opportunities. So with that final thought, I want to turn the conversation over now to a phenomenal leader in this work. Glenn Lloyd has been an entrepreneur and a pioneer in the field of urban economic development for over 25 years. He's the founder of City Fresh Foods, the Urban Farming Institute, and he helped found the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. Currently, he leads the Foundation for Business Equity in Mill Cities Community Investments. Glenn, thanks so much for joining us this morning to lead this important discussion.
Thanks, Ben. And I'm looking forward to bringing on the panelists. I'm proud to share the stage with Catherine Martinez, Director of Development of MACDC, Alexander Nova, Deputy Director of Lawrence Partnership, Linda Dorsiner, VP of Diversity of Inclusion of Suffolk Community Construction. I know Linda, we all know Linda as a former state senator for Suffolk, not too far from where I live. So glad to be joining the stage. And before we start, just to set the context, and Ben, I think outlined it really well, of why it's so important for us to support our small businesses, specifically our Black and Brown, in stabilizing and growing them. And I think what we're going to talk about on this panel is kind of like the three legs of the stool, the hows that we've been learning that really kind of works well when they work together, they intersect. And that's the kind of capacity building side of the equation. We'll go a little deep into that. It's also, contracts and customers. How do we get folks to get more revenue on the top line? And probably one of my most important topics is the capital, right? So we'll dive deeper and find out what's happening across the state, what innovatively is happening. What's been referenced before is some coalition work. And so I'd love to dive deeper around some of the more local regional coalitions that have been forming during the pandemic and prior, and more recently statewide, which I think we're seeing some impressive kind of connections through that. So why don't we jump in and really focus on at least the first conversation around capacity building. I don't know this term technical assistance. I'm neutral on it. So I'm going to say capacity building is one of these important steps that we got to make sure our entrepreneurs have the ability to stabilize and grow. And so really I'll open up to the panel, maybe start with either Alex or Catherine around what do you see that's working, that's helping fill some of these gaps around making sure these businesses have full support, at the stages that they're at. Maybe Alex we'll start with a more regional, because I know there's some impressive work around the coalition work you've been doing in the Merrimack Valley.
Sure. Thank you, Glenn, and thank you, MassINC, for hosting this forum and inviting us to be part of it. As you mentioned, I'm with the Lawrence Partnership. We're a private-public collaboration based out of the city of Lawrence. And I want to share a little bit about who we are, because I think that sets the stage really for the work directly, addressing your question around supporting the ecosystem for our small businesses. So we are a private, as I said, a private-public partnership. We represent leadership from local businesses, area banks, nonprofits, education and healthcare institutions, and government. And what we do is we are all coming together, committed to fostering an equitable and inclusive economy in the city of Lawrence. And that sort of coming together and collective work is really the key to how we've addressed supporting our small business owners. We take a lot of pride in understanding that for our city, our biggest asset is our people, and small businesses represent a strong component of the economy in Lawrence and the opportunity, right, for the people of Lawrence. So our work around Small Business Coalition was really strengthened and came together with the gas explosions, understanding we had these partners around the table coming together and addressing how do we support these small businesses that were forced to close their doors, right? And service providers, private companies, all coming together and trying to identify, one, reaching each and individual small businesses, understanding, where their needs were, and that helped inform a lot of how we work together. Understanding what were the barriers to accessing the services that the business service providers had available to each of these businesses, but really thinking about our work from a small business owner's perspective and being centric to addressing the needs from their perspective. I think that definitely has been the key to the success of this coalition, because it's not about an individual service business provider and the service they provide, but truly addressing a need that was gonna help that particular business owner.
And Alice, if I could, and hopefully you guys don't mind my moderating here, but I think it's important for the folks listening in to get a little bit of the mechanics of can you, how did it come about? Who's in it? What's the experience of maybe the business that roll through this coalition? I think it's important because it's a unique approach. I think there's been there's a restaurant side. I'd love to hear more, just folks to hear more about what exactly is happening there.
Sure. And when we first started the small business, we've been working collectively with many of our partners. But the Small Business Coalition sort of coming truly together during the gas explosion. We collaborated in partnership with ECCF, who has been an outstanding partner in this effort, bringing in their perspective from the funder level, but also being at the table to understand what were the challenges that as service providers we had in addressing the needs of the business partners, of the business owner. We have E4All, MCCI, at our local level being key partners to our success. And we have representation from the city of Lawrence. In this case, although we are very local in terms of our focus being Lawrence, we do understand that when it comes to servicing our small business owners, that we have to approach it from a regional perspective. So having at the table our neighboring town representatives from the towns, organizations such as MGCC, right, who's providing and looking to learn from us what are the needs that these small business owners have in order to succeed. And our small businesses, right, are locally owned. I would say they're micro businesses, right, mom and pop shops, but they are the heart of our economy, and they provide the opportunities, as Ben mentioned, right, to address that wealth gap. And we understood that it was essential for us to support the small business owners. They needed access to information, access to program, access to capital. A lot of what we're discussing here today.
So and there's a lot of modeling there, folks, and I think it's a very powerful regional kind of localized coalition building model that I think is very powerful. And we could talk more about. I think now there's a relationship with Small Business Strong coming in and trying to centralize some of that kind of TA2 where there's gaps in the system, and so very exciting work in Merrimack Valley. I want to lean a little bit towards Linda with a more specific example of how capacity building works, kind of within a trades industry. And we've known Suffolk for all the great work they do in the community, but specifically around, I know they do a lot of specific training. And so Linda, could we just what's your pros and cons? Like, what have you learned? Because I know you're relatively recent over there, but like, what can you say is it works, doesn't work within the trades training program that you have happening at Suffolk, or any more information you want to give on that? Oh, you're on mute.
14 months in, we'll remember to turn on the button, right? Geez. Well, thank you, Glenn, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with this incredible panel, Mass Inc. Thank you. Been there, you won't believe it. It's been 3 years and 4 months. I know. so I've been at Suffolk now a while, but just want to talk a little bit about what we're doing, right, in terms of the construction industry in particular. I'll lift up really quick, one of the programs that we have, which is the Build With Us at Suffolk, which is focusing on, as we talk about access and opportunity, as we talk about small businesses, that's a lens that we are focusing on, have been in that space for about 8 years. The program started, where we're really doing training, right? Traditional training program, kind of like TA, right? Technical assistance, like what Alex just talked about with these small businesses. How do we help build their capacity? They are not primes now, which is the top subcontractors on the job, but they're in the second, third, fourth, or fifth tier. And our goal is to lift up these companies that are Black, Latinx, Asian, Native American, women-owned businesses, and veterans as well, but really focusing to see how we build a capacity to become the primes on these jobs. And so Suffolk has been running an 8-week course curriculum. It used to be called Trade Partnership Series. Now it's Build With Us at Suffolk, where it's opening doors for, again, businesses owned by those groups I just mentioned that are SBA certified, to help them expand their business, develop important relationships, and make the unique mark on the industry. So it's an 8-week course, started in Boston. I know with this Gateway Cities, we're talking about the whole state, but it started in Boston, but we're a national company and we're going into all the other regions. But it's really lifting up the construction process, systems, and technologies to help these smaller businesses understand when you team up with a GC, this is what is expected of you, right? It's talking about access, right, to capital, and what does that look like? Having bonding capacity. But more importantly, as a small business, we know this in construction, scheduling is everything, right? If we don't schedule right, you will go out of business. So it's really teaching them the ins and outs of what does it mean to be part of a team in terms of being part of a GC, to work on a job, and really building long-term mentoring relationships within Suffolk leadership. So I can say, for an example, for us, we've had multiple examples where we've had a small business come in, a Black-owned small business, for instance, who came in and their revenue was just about $500,000 after going through Build With Us at Suffolk, teaming up on a lot of our jobs as well, right? Because we're GCs, we hire subcontractors to build. And so they are now doing $17 million, worth of work. And so that is, how do we really create the partnership, right? And this is what's important with this summit today. It's looking at, it can't be a one and done. And so the policies, the processes, the systems, the procedures are going to be critical and very, very important. So even as Alex lifted up the coalition, which is fantastic, and doing the TA, I'm all for technical assistance. And I say that as a former chair of small business and community development when I was in the House. We traveled out to Springfield, and then former State Rep Carlos Gonzalez ran the Latino Chamber of Commerce. Incredible. Because they were working with the small mom and pop shops, right? But they had accountants on the staff, right, to help with the paperwork. They had lawyers on the staff to help these small businesses, mom and pops, a lot of times immigrant communities, right, that are starting these businesses with the idea of, wow, we're going to make it in this country, and yet does not have the backroom support. So that is so, so critical in terms of the work as we look at gateway cities, we say Boston, but it's about the whole Commonwealth, right? And gateway cities is an incredible part of that puzzle. And so we want to make sure that we're intentional around that.
Thanks. Alex, did I cut you off early? Did you have?
She did. No worries. I was going to expand a little bit on, where we went from, the response to the gas explosion to where the coalition is now, and how prepared we were really to address how COVID was impacting our small businesses. It was a short period of time, really kind of starting to feel we were entering into recovery. And, having that information, having been able to literally knock door to door to understand, what were the needs of our businesses that kept them from, scaling or opening their doors again after the gas explosion, was really understanding that we needed to bring more partners to this ecosystem to support that, right? And I believe Nate Robertson, that from the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission, also part of our Small Business Coalition, understanding that we needed, that our small businesses needed financial training, right? They needed to understand their books. They needed to keep accurate financial records, even to be able to access a lot of the funding and services that were out there for them. Understanding in general, right? What are the constraints that this small business owner has, right? Putting together the fact that these are households and running a business, and now they have families at home. Now they have elder family members that were impacted by COVID, and how that was ultimately impacting the economy, the economic status of the small business owner. So engaging, again, reaching out and engaging in a more regional capacity with, organizations like Amplify Latinx. Obviously, we talked about our local partners, but MCCI, the BEI program, just being able to share the status of our businesses in the Merrimack Valley with the broader coalition that exists right outside, like as Linda mentioned, right, Boston. Our voices and what our needs were, we had that data to share and bring other partners on board and really paint a clear picture across the Commonwealth, right, about what is it that our business of color needs were. So that I just wanted to add how it expanded and sort of where we are now.
So thank you. And I'll just quickly back to Linda, if I could. And I think we can keep medium to high level, but I do want to get a little deeper because I think every industry is nuanced and there's different kind of barriers for growth for some of these businesses. And Linda, so you mentioned a specific example, and I'm just curious, when we think about trades, especially in the greater Boston area, you can't not think about unions and the challenges if I'm a non-union shop or a union shop. Just curious from your perspective around, again, challenges within that, how you guys have overcame that. I'm just curious in that even specific example, was that a non-union shop that went to a union shop? I'm just curious because of your what you've been finding. And I think it is a greater Boston area, but it does flow across the state. So
it does.
Yeah.
And great follow-up question, Glenn. Good job. I will say that no doubt there are challenges, right? And so it's really about how do you bring people to the table to really starting to have those conversations. Conversations began several years ago and I was elected, but we continue it now, right? In terms of unions are a critical component. I'm going to say this, Boston, pretty much union shop, right? And so we work with our unions. With that business, it was a non-union business when it went through the program, but it signed on. It became a signatory of the union, to be able to participate. And so we've been really working and building the partnerships as well with these businesses to see for our jobs in particular, if they are not all of our jobs are union, right? Outside of the belt, there are non-union jobs that we're also doing. So we have opportunities to really do more, I would say, in terms of with the MBE businesses. But yes, it is work. It's getting these businesses, but it's really simplifying the process because you'll hear too, a small business owner will say in construction will say, I have to pay $30,000 to just sign on, And so we're meeting with the unions to say, okay, what is it really, right? That these businesses have to do to be part, to be a signatory, but more importantly, to be able to join the union, but not just stay within the union, right? Because then there's also opportunities they have where there's non-union work. So those are conversations that continue to happen. I believe in bringing people to the table. And yes, they're tough sometimes, but we got to have it, right? Because if we're talking about closing the wealth gap, if we're talking about building equity, if we're talking about access and opportunity for Black-owned, Latinx, Asian-owned businesses, yes, women, I believe the women and veterans too, but I'm saying particularly people of color in this moment, then we have to go above and beyond. And so, we continue in these conversations. They're going well, right? And so, we have different partners with different unions. And so we continue to plug on, but it's very important. The other piece I'll say, there's the business aspect, which is important because this is how we build wealth, right? If you're supporting small businesses, as we talk about procurement and the whole nine, very, very important. But it's also about boots on the ground in terms of the folks who are getting in the union, right? And so working with our unions as well, because there's certain times where you have to sign up to join a union, right? Like in February, one day. Right. Well, If someone didn't know about that one day, then they're out of it for a year, right? So how do we get creative with our partners? We know a lot of union members are going to be retiring because of the age, right? And so that's important. So there's going to be a need for a pipeline of new workers coming in, getting trained and being ready to hit the ground. So there's a lot of different conversations that are happening. And for us, it's really creating the ecosystem, more importantly, but really connecting the dots for everyone, right? So we all can get on the same page. Everyone is saying the right thing, which is great, right? But now it's about action and putting things in place, that this can get done no matter who's heading up a company, right? No matter who's the elected official in the moment in time, it's how do we put these processes in place so that it's everlasting? And obviously it's gonna evolve and emerge, but we need to really get it done. That's what I'll say.
Amen. So that's a more specific, clearly, but going general, but around some of the trades concerns and issues,
Yeah.
but seeing success there. The chat's lighting up. There's a lot of Lawrence lovers in the group, so I'm one of them. And I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that's come out of that community that I think we could learn from. But let's get Catherine in the conversation, Catherine. So I know you sit at a different perch in a lot of ways because you're looking across the state. I've been involved with we call Joe's Wednesdays meetings, right? We get all the CDCs come around and we're sharing a lot of information. Can you just from that maybe perspective, I know I've been very active in the coalition for equitable economy, where you see what's good, what's not, what's happening from a capacity building perspective, just to get your statewide perspective.
Absolutely. Well, first, I just want to say hello to everybody. Thank you so much. I feel so honored to be on this panel with such thoughtful folks that have been doing this work for a long time. I am the new Director of Economic Development for the Massachusetts Association of Community Development Corporations. Prior to that, I was the Executive Director over at Lena Park CDC in Dorchester. So I've been floating in this ecosystem for quite some time now, but I still consider myself very much emerging and rising in this field and just learning so much of the work that so many other organizations and folks are doing. So it's a pleasure to be here with you guys today. As I've transitioned into my new role over at MACDC, one of the things that I have been really proud to participate in and help organize has really been looking at small business technical assistance from a very holistic point of view, really understanding that our TAs out there are really needing and urging for additional resources to be able to assist on the ground as they continue to do this work and continue to find innovative ways to support the small businesses, not only in Boston, but all over the Commonwealth. MACDC's priorities have been small business technical assistance and increasing the amount of resources coming from the state budget. Recently, we had a big win with that. We were allocated $7 million in the state budget for continuing to support small business technical assistance. So we're inching closer to our wish list of 10 million, which we really think is the need in the Commonwealth to really plug in the holes. In addition to that, during the pandemic, one of the things that we quickly understood is that the TA field just didn't have the streamlined resources in place to be able to really filter a lot of information. So Linda, to your point, in terms of opportunities and having access, that was really a challenge, especially during COVID. And MACDC's response to that was to really convene consistent meetings, and we called it the Community Business Network. And we really created a platform to be able to make sure that folks were getting the latest information in terms of PPP, federal funding, grants. We partnered up with MGCC, which have been great partners in ensuring that our membership and our networks really understood not only what was available, but also how to apply and how to overcome challenges and troubleshoot with folks that needed access quickly. So we've been looking at this in a very intentional manner because we understand that small business, they are the heart of economic development. We can talk about housing, we can talk about a lot of different other priorities, but small businesses, if they thrive, the community thrives, and then we're really going to be able to move the needle on a lot of different issues that we want to address. So at MACDC, we want to make sure that we continue to advocate, we continue to partner, and we continue to be intentional about supplier diversity. Another big bullet point for us is making sure that we're increasing transparency within our own membership in terms of the opportunities that are being allocated or filtered through community development corporations, that there is commitment there because it's embedded in the mission of so many community development corporations, and that we are really the champions of making sure that we are facilitating those opportunities. In Boston, we recently created a Boston pilot program where our CDCs are voluntarily deciding to report and provide transparency on the type of supplier diversity opportunities that are available on their projects and the intentional ways that they're going about making sure that they're looking at it from an equity lens. And we would love to see that same type of program across the Commonwealth. And we know that there is a lot of will within our membership and statewide to participate in it. And we want to make sure that we are creating goals that really move the needle. We want to make sure that we're finding strategic ways to enforce a lot of the commitments that we make. And then we also want to make sure that we get strong outcomes in a manner that really starts to show the Commonwealth as a leader in terms of supplier diversity. So all that to say, I'm excited to be a part of that work, and I'm looking forward to continuing to find ways to not only just continue to have discussions on it, but to actually lead on this issue and this topic.
Excellent. Well, why don't I pull one of those threads, Catherine, which is let's the next stage of conversation, which is around capital. Let's talk money. And yeah, and I think I just throw my kind of environmental context, which is, I mean, we've never seen anything like this before, right? We've got federal dollars coming in, which is pretty much grant-like dollars, a lot of state, in necessary, right? Because we've never seen anything like this, what this pandemic has been. And so the environment has shifted a little bit. So I want to first applaud the coalition work. I want to applaud the state and all the local activists who helped put this money on the street. And I've never seen it in my decades of experience in the state where literally BIPOC businesses were front of line. I mean, I'm really proud to say I'm from Massachusetts with the work that happened in the last, half a year, specifically more recently. So great stuff. The challenge exists still, right? We have industries that are still very much underwater. We have this resiliency conversation. How do we get people back? So we're going to need all kinds of capital. We still need more grant capital, but we need resiliency capital, low cost capital. So just curious. And again, my last statement around this is this combination between advice and capacity and capital. Always, when you combine them together, it's a better use of both resources, right? And so with that in mind, just love maybe popcorn style. What is the panel seeing from a capital gap perspective? Some innovations out there that they think is could be helpful for the audience to know about.
Well, one plug that I'll briefly bring up is the ARPA money. At MACDC, we've been doing a lot of convening and having a lot of thoughtful discussions around this ARPA money and determining that we now have the color of capital report. We now know that there is a $500 million gap. We now have an idea of what we need to be asking and requesting. And we don't want to miss out on this momentum. We don't want to miss out on this money. And we really want to make sure that small business, in line with all the other priorities that we know are just as important, doesn't get left out of this one in a lifetime type of money. So we want to encourage folks to continue to think about what are the real needs of the small business sector and how can we leverage some of those dollars. So we're continuing to have that conversation, and I think this is going to be the best opportunity to be able to address that.
Anyone else want to jump in?
I'll just say really quick that the acknowledgement of, the focus on Black businesses, Latinx businesses is incredible, right? In particular, just had a meeting with Secretary Keneally, and he was talking about the mass growth capital. And I know it's this coalition as well, right? People rallied, $700 million available for small businesses. 43% of that went to businesses of color, right? And 46% went to women. It's outstanding because that's never happened before, right? And so, but again, now it's doubling down, right? As we talk about all businesses, yes, all small businesses, yes, but there has to be a focus and a priority intentionally on these historically excluded groups that's been not in the process for a very long time. So,
Catherine, Alex, you want to get in?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, you referenced the color of capital report. So if folks have not seen that, they should go find it, look for it, the Boston indicators. There's 11 action items at the last, 4 or 5 pages. The coalition that some of us are involved with on this line have identified the priorities. And so when one of them is credit enhancement, how do we mitigate and how do we allow our mission-driven capital providers to do 10, 20x what they're currently doing? Because we're in these communities, we know these businesses. That was one of our top priorities of the coalition. The other one, how do you support these mission-driven providers, right? So they're around. I mean, we're all fragile. This is a relatively new industry compared to housing and so on and so forth. How do you really support us? The MTCIs of the world, the BAIs of the world, the Leafs of the world, and others that I'm forgetting and I'm not saying right now, unfortunately. But so that was another big chunk. And then the other one is equity. And so I just want to quickly say, equity capital is growth capital. And there's not a lot of options right now for Black and brown folks to find equity capital. So we really got to solve that issue too. And so again, I highly recommend the folks who have not read the report to take a look, because I think they're very well thought out action items. So I think we have about 4 or 5 minutes, and I saved the best for last, which is procurement, which is the hardest, from my perspective, the hardest leg of the stool when we think about this stuff. But and again, maybe popcorn style. I think there's 3 categories. There's public procurement, and they fall into, you got state municipality, right? Everyone needs to be doing their job. And unfortunately, some of the most recent news doesn't show that, right? You got the quasi-publics who have a tremendous amount of buying power. And then you get the private sector, and which is very quiet. You don't really know what's happening behind those scenes, right? So just curious, and we get the pace setters. We could talk about that if we had time to, but what are folks on this panel finding from a procurement perspective in terms of like lessons, challenges, things that we want to share with the audience?
The piece I'll say, go ahead, Alex.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, from our organization perspective, right, a public-private perspective, we feel there are challenges and sort of opportunities, right? We often serve as an intermediary, and I think that with working in concert to support the small businesses, and then communicating and working with the private sector to really help them understand what their role is, and really like look to share some accountability around implementing and supporting diversity supplier, right? And hiring, making those connections and brokering those relationships between our businesses of color and the private sector. So a lot we see a lot of opportunity there. And when we think about, building this network of business leaders of color in our region and connecting them to our private organizations. That's a lot, that's where I'm seeing the most opportunity for us, and are looking to work in continuing to do that sort of relationship brokerage.
I will add that in the CDC world, we've definitely seen this as a challenge. And I think, Alex, to your point, one of the challenges that I particularly like to highlight is really accountability, and really realizing that a lot of CDCs have to do more leaning in terms of procurement. We don't always have to be as public or as transparent as other state agencies or public agencies need to be. And I think that can be challenging. So it's really about convening leaders in the CDC world that are willing to lean in and say, we want to be transparent. We want to be intentional about making sure that the supplier diversity, we're leading in supplier diversity, and we're putting processes in place that make sense. And again, like I said, the Boston pilot program, it's not just CDCs. We partner up with organizations as well that represent supplier diversity advocacy, and we want to find feasible ways to continue to be able to do this work, but also share the pie. And I think the more we continue to talk about sharing the pie, and we take Boston as good takeaways and lessons learned, that we have to be intentional, we have to be able to be transparent, and then we also have to be able to establish real goals in order to have strong outcomes. So in terms of procurement on our side, we are holding ourselves accountable. We're making sure that we're following this as a mandate through our missions. And we're also wanting to continue to provide transparency as much as we can to make sure that we're living up to the commitment.
That's fantastic. Alex and Catherine, great comments, and totally agree. It is accountability. The piece I'll say, I know we said pace setters started in 2018, just have to say this. I know it started in Boston, but they're going statewide, right? But really focused on Black owned businesses, but now it's gonna be Black Latinx as well. And so, but I'll just add a quick piece. Public procurement, it is about accountability and transparency, right? And we know everything that's happened. But again, if we could put the processes in place, the procedures and everything in place, doesn't matter who's there, it will happen. The other piece I'll say in terms of public-private or private, love, like even with the pace setters, right? Initially, and these are good things. It started in 2018. There are some challenges, right, that we were able to see. And I look at Glenn, because Glenn was in this conversation as well. But, you know, we have CEOs and we see the mayors on the line, town administrators. It's fantastic you're here. Mayor Rivera, see you doing shout outs in the chat. But, you know, I think it's important. We have the CEOs, but it's great. We need the leadership teams as well. But more importantly, we need procurement leaders, right? Like Delana, who is in charge of that, right? And it's helping them through the process, putting in, understanding why we are doing this. As a CEO, yes, you want to do it, but now how do we work closely with the team that is in charge of it? And what are the metrics that they're going to be working on to get it done? But again, working in partnership with them. CEO is fantastic, saying the message, which is great, but how are we really driving it through the organization to the folks who make the decision and really can upend a decision, right? Because even if you have a contract, there's opportunities, you know, to possibly get out of it. So very important, you know, that continues to be the forefront. But great panel.
Linda, you had the last word.
Oh.
If we could, no, it's fine. If we could just, amazing minds. We're so lucky to have these leaders at the table. So we maybe like a virtual clap. And I think that for us concludes this panel. And I get the privilege of handing it over to Andre at Mass Inc. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks, Glenn, for the introduction and for moderating a wonderful discussion. And thanks, MassINC, for letting me wear a tie today. Thank you to each of our panelists for your leadership and expertise. Catherine, Alexandra, Linda, stand by. You'll weigh in more. It's great to hear about the work that you're all leading on at the state and local level. And I'm thrilled to be able to bring into the conversation now the comments and questions of the Gateway City practitioners who are doing this work every day. We have with us today mayors, economic directors, public-private partnership members, state and local elected officials, as well as nonprofit leaders, all committed to advancing this important work around economic inclusion. In finalizing his presentation, Ben posed to you all what our latest report detailed as the needed strategy to close these gaps that our entrepreneurs of color face to scale their businesses. No doubt our attendees have a lot of reactions and insights to add to the conversation, so I want to dive right into the question, comments, and answer session. We'll have about 20 minutes or so. Just logistically, there are a few ways you can ask a question or make a comment. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll find a few functions you can click on. If you click raise hand, then we can call on you directly to speak, or you can type your comment or question into the Q&A box or the chat room. And just so you're aware, if you're called on, your video will not be shown. It will just be audio. And also, the administrator will kind of turn off your audio once you ask your question. So make sure that you state all parts of your question up front, or you'll have to raise your hand again to ask that follow-up. So I think we have a couple of ringers actually with us to start the comment period. So let me see if we have Aaron Vega. I saw him in the chat, former Holyoke State Representative and currently the City of Holyoke's Economic Director.
Good morning. Good morning, Andre. You can't see me, but I'm not wearing a tie and I'm happy about it. It's good to see you, Linda. And I assume there's other people on this call that I can't see, but great to be part of this discussion. Everything you all said on the panel was fantastic. A couple quick things. Holyoke, as you all know, and probably like many other Gateway Cities communities right now, are involved in a number of studies and surveys Rapid Recovery, Neighborhood Hub put out by Mass Housing. Of course, we have an urban renewal plan. And of course, we're trying to figure out what to do with these ARPA funds. Two quick comments and then a question. I think what we're looking for at this time, and I know that Chairman Cabral and Chairman Eric Lesser are somewhere in this call, so hopefully they're listening. We need implementation money. We've got the plans, we know the issues, and the technical assistance is always great. The implementation and some of that implementation money that I think could really be thought about for places like Holyoke. If we think outside the box, municipal staff funding, not for our average staffers, but for diversity and inclusion people, right? If we want to actually create that department in a place like Holyoke, we don't have the capacity or the money to actually start that. If the state could help start that, that would be fantastic. If we had funding from the state to address marketing, money from the state to address creative economy, those kind of positions that are critical for gateway cities, but we cannot afford to bring them to fruition. That would be great to see the Gateway Cities Caucus push something like that. We know we have wonderful programs for low-income housing, but when you look at a place like Holyoke, the differential between low-income housing and market rate isn't that big. Our general rates of rent for market rate are in the $1,300 to $1,500 range. Far cry from Lawrence and Boston, that's pushing $1,800 to $2,800. And then our low income rates are $900. So we're doing all we can to get more housing on stock. And it ties into entrepreneurs because we're trying to look at local entrepreneurs, local developers that can take on those 4 and 6 unit properties that are the blight in our neighborhoods, right? So it's great to have Wind Development doing 86 units, but we need those small developers and they need help. Local support. Last 2 things, as was mentioned, E4All out of Lawrence is now in Holyoke, Spark E4All Holyoke. We both have an English cohort and a Spanish cohort that runs twice a year. Amazing. It's free to all the participants. We need funding to make sure this stays free. The director spends half their time raising money for the organization. Yeah, we all know how important it is. These should be kept free for participants, for Black and brown, women, veterans, and all people to start a business. That's the kind of support we need. And then the last thing I would say, and I think this is something I remember that Senator Linda and I talked about, and I know that Carlos Gonzalez talks about this a lot as well for Springfield. We need to work in the private sector with banks to create high-risk small loans. Entrepreneurs and startups need that $25,000, $50,000, under $100,000, but they're high risk. We know it. If we could work with banks, local banks and investment firms to create a pot of money that could be utilized by a local by say something like a redevelopment authority or within the city to fund high risk small loans for entrepreneurs and startups, that would be fantastic. So if there's any examples of that, we'd love to mirror that. So again, thank you for the great discussion and look forward to catching up with all of you very soon.
Thanks, Representative Vega. That was an amazing set of comments and issues you raised. So if any of the panelists, including Glenn, want to respond, please just unmute yourself so I know to call on you.
Well,
Glenn.
I want to be, I just quickly 2 points, if I could. I think those are great suggestions. One is entrepreneurship is a unique art and science, and not everyone is a good advisor and actually even could assess what's happening and the situation happening with entrepreneurs. I just want to highlight that, people who've been in the business and seen the patterns, they're more helpful to some of these at the assessment level. Very important to do really good assessment of what's going on with these entrepreneurs. And so I do think, I just want to just overemphasize that. The other piece you mentioned about the bank, I 100% agree. And I say within the action items that have been put forth by the Color of Gap report, the first item is credit enhancement. And so that actually is to mission-driven folks, but also to banks. And what that does is that mitigates the risk. So if that's first lost for these banks, they could be more aggressive of making these loans. And so if we all join in together to put money in that pot, we could help put friendly pressure on the banks to do more of these loans. So we can be allies there for sure.
And love the idea around the small lots, right? In terms of the housing opportunities in Holyoke and in these gateway cities. See, I think of Catherine and MACDC, right? You may not have a CDC in your community, but they can work with you, right? I worked with Joe and the team for a long time. They will come out and help, right? Where they may not be staffed now to do the planning, but they can help with that. And this is where, you know, teaming up, coming up with a strategy, try to get state dollars, mass development, mass housing. I mean, yes, but also, you know, so many other monies out there to create the housing of less than 6 units, right, on one site. And so that's important too. So great lifting that up, Aaron.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on the loan piece, and you know, one of the initiatives in Lawrence that we have been fortunate to work on is partnering with 12 different banks, right, that are contributing to a venture, what we call the venture loan fund in Lawrence, and the city of Lawrence taking part with the loan loss reserve, 10% for the loan loss reserve, and addressing, you know, some of what Representative Vega was mentioning, and it's, you know, providing that opportunity for our small businesses to get access. Businesses that wouldn't traditionally qualify for financing from these banks. And by bringing the banks together, really understanding that some of these businesses don't have the credit that they're looking for, the collateral, and creating this fund specifically to address and service those small business owners. We you know, MCCI has been a huge partner in helping us administer that program. Again, looking at it mutually, right? Providing the support that the business needs to prepare that application and present their business plan and how they're going to use those funds. And then having the private sector sit around all these institutional banks and challenging to think, you know, how they look at these loans and the applicants. So that's been something that we have been spearheading and just sort of relaunch a new phase of the venture loan fund here in Lawrence. But it's also, the model's also expanding in other communities. Glenn, I believe we're in there's Haverhill. Some of the banks are looking to expand in Lowell in partnership with MCCI. So definitely there's been success to that model.
And I just wanted to jump in that same vein in terms of the discussion on banks. One of the areas where MACDC has taken some leadership or driving some of the discussion has been around the bank mergers that are happening here in the Commonwealth and the banks that are coming in. And, you know, I really encourage folks to pay a lot of attention because right now there is a momentum. They are leaning in. They are wanting to hear a little bit about how we feel in terms of these mergers. And this is a great opportunity for us to put together some just general requests that we have, especially around the small business side and the underwriting, and them encouraging them to look at programs or create programs that allow for small businesses to overcome some of those challenges. And we need more thoughtful partners on that. So we want to make sure that folks are staying current and understanding that while these bank mergers are happening, this is a great opportunity for us to leverage a lot of the information that we currently have, the data, and show where these banks can not only come into and get business from a lot of our organizations, but also how they can partner up with us and be intentional about addressing this access to capital and access to money. So I think that we should continue to find ways to engage the banks and find and be more innovative about programs, offering them solutions that they can go ahead and implement as they're transitioning into the Commonwealth.
Thank you all. I believe we have Mayor Tyre from the city of Pittsfield on the line here. Could we unmute her?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thanks so much, Mayor.
Thank you so much for today's session. I'm always inspired whenever I participate in any of these Gateway MassINC sessions. Thank you for the panelists and your expertise. Communities like Pittsfield and other gateway cities are on the cusp of wanting to do innovative things to support our Black-owned businesses and our entrepreneurs who haven't had traditional access to things like financing or to even the TA grants. And what I've been thinking about as I've been listening today is that we have a very successful economic development, Pittsfield Economic Revitalization Corporation, which is also a CDC. And as we've been working through the ARPA funding and trying to understand how we can use that to serve the Black community in particular, Black businesses and the economy, thinking about how to use this existing structure, but set aside a sum of money from ARPA specifically to be programmed for Black businesses and Black entrepreneurs. And I really feel that before we undertake this work here in the city of Pittsfield, we just got approval. We put forward a proposal and the city council approved the creation of an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And we're in the process now of writing our job descriptions for our 2 new positions. And hopefully by the fall, we'll be undertaking a hiring process. And I really want to, I realize that there's an urgent need, but I also want to make sure that whatever we do, we're doing it well and that it's meaningful and that it's responding to the needs of the Black community. And so the timing of our new diversity officer is, to me, critical in our next level of decision making, because I want them to assess our current circumstances. I want them to tell us where are the gaps. I want to learn from them and design programs around their recommendations as opposed to what we have just traditionally used. The TA grants have been mentioned quite a bit here. And so I feel like in this next year, the city of Pittsfield has a convergence of opportunities to really begin approaching this work in a way that's meaningful. And, you know, this ARPA money is providing us an opportunity that we would have never had before. So today's conversation has certainly sparked some ideas in my own mind. But again, you know, you can't see me, but I'm a white middle-class woman. And the members of our PERC board are generally white people who run businesses. And I want to make sure that whatever we do next for the expansion of our economy in communities of color, that we're doing it in a way that, rather than imposing our old traditional models on them, what are the creative ways? What are the things they actually need? And how do we respond to that? So there's a lot of work for us to do in this next year. And this conversation is certainly laying the foundation for that. So thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Tyre. And before the panelists jump in to respond, I want to add a related comment or question that was in the chat from Mary Jo Bohart, who's the Economic Development Director from the city of Fitchburg. She was looking for any advice about how municipalities can best nurture their entrepreneurs of color. You know, the city of Fitchburg's looking for ways, most effective ways of supporting and strengthen the cluster of businesses of color that they have there now. So want to turn it over to all of you. I'm sure you'll have a lot of ideas about that. Alex, do you want to maybe take the first stab at it?
Trying to figure out which angle to take on first. I think that I just want to thank the mayor for the question, but also, for probably like sharing the intentionality, right? Leadership does matter. I would say that it might sound very simple, but taking a step to simply listen to those entrepreneurs of color. We've hosted a number of different focus groups to truly understand, why services are not being utilized. What are the type of services that, are out there? Do they make sense? Is it what they want or need? Are we providing those services at the time that they need it? There's so much to learn by simply allowing local leaders that are in the front line and the business owners to have a voice and to express, not be told what they need, but to share what they need. that's how we can address a lot of those needs. You know, for us in Lawrence, language is a big barrier. So again, when I think, and Ben, you know, you said talent right up front, and it's an area that I'm super passionate about, because, you know, all our gateway cities have so much talent. A lot of them are working in the front lines and have direct access to our small business owners, to be able to speak to them in their language, to be able to understand their culture. So the communication across, from the business owner, from the community member, the person in the front line servicing those business owners, and moving that up the leadership ranks, right? There has to be vulnerability in hearing that information that is being shared, so that the services and the impact is greater. I will say also, you know, from the perspective of engaging small businesses, we focus a lot on trust, and understanding, you know, who are our business owners going to trust, and building those relationships, so that we're able to facilitate the information that they need, and we're able to have access to them and have their engagement in shaping the response to their needs. I hope that's helpful.
I agree with Alex, and I want to add some of the feedback we've heard from folks in our community business network has really been around the effects, not only coming out of the pandemic, but even prior to the pandemic. A lot of our small businesses are really on a day-to-day survival mode and really just struggling to get through the day. They're also delivering the service, rendering the services, they're running their businesses, and they're not able to really take a beat and take a moment to sit and even address what it is that they need access to. So as the TAs that are on the ground, one of the frustrations that they're running up against is how to really be able to connect when folks are really in survival mode. And I think some of the solutions that they brought up is really assessing what are the challenges, especially when it has to do with technology. You know, some of these businesses don't have email addresses. You know, we can set up a website where we can send newsletters, but if they don't have email addresses to access it, they don't have legal structure to their businesses, they don't have access to legal advice. I mean, there are so many different pockets that we can look in a traditional manner of the way businesses are set up that are just not there for small businesses of color. And, you know, it's actually pretty impressive that they're still thriving and that they're still growing at the rate that they are without having those things in place. So I think from a holistic point of view, you can think that businesses, especially the mom and pops, need us to, as simple as Alex said, we need to go to them. We need to listen to them. We need to be able to engage them and be innovative and creative on ways to do that, because the traditional things that are in place for businesses to thrive just don't necessarily reach the population that we are trying to see grow. So I think the more that we have people in leadership positions that understand that and that are willing to be intentional about thinking about ways around it, that's really going to be how you can get this niche to actually grow and thrive.
I just want to double down on both Alex and Catherine on what they said, 100%, and then just say, and love the question, Mayor Tyre. I would say what we've learned for the Biz Equity Initiative, which is one of the programs from the Foundation Biz Equity. I put the website in the chat, and MCCI's approach over the years, it starts with deep relationships. And that deep relationship is cultural sensitivity, it's language, and those form trust. And that's when entrepreneurs start opening up. And then you can really be effective at working with them. The BEI program started with like a 400-hour commitment. It's down to like 250 hours. That's a lot. It's a huge commitment, but we said, we're going to work with you and we're not going anywhere. So I'd say hiring to that type of strategy and people who need to understand small business because part of the trust too is you know what you're talking about. And so those folks have to understand really what's happening. And then finally, the other big part is the tools. So how do you connect them to the appropriate tools for growth and having those lined up, or start creating your own tools too. But that would be my specific answer.
So we only have a couple of minutes left, and I know there's a few questions that I've seen in the chat. So I just want to mention the questions, and if we real quickly, anybody wants to respond to any of them, that'd be great. I guess the other question that I would just add myself is, if municipalities are pretty resource constrained, especially in terms of staffing, to do the kind of, listening that we're talking about here, how would you start building that kind of capacity? I mean, is it through creating peer networks? Getting, one of the questions that we have here is about anchor institutions. What role can they play in gateway cities to build that capacity and build a diverse supply chain? Another question is about how do you engage small business owners with limited English language skills? Another question around, is it viable for city governments to back higher risk loans the way SBA does?
So I guess I can jump in there. From one of the things that, in terms of addressing sort of the capacity and the constraint, right? Individually, all our organizations feel that. What we try to do is really work collaboratively, right? Not look at one entity. So at the Lawrence Partnership, we seek and we sit at the table with the City of Lawrence, the Economic Development Director, the Planning, the Health and Human Services Director, all our anchor nonprofit leaders, the private sector, and really see where, there are constraints and there's still capacity issues, but how can we work together to still be able to address the needs of our community? So again, I can't highlight enough how much it matters to be able to partner with organizations in different sectors. Everybody brings a different strength, a different level of services or capacities that can help really move a certain particular initiative forward.
Yeah, and I would add to Rep. Vega's point about needing funding for implementation, right? Needing money to build capacity, to create these positions that can concentrate on this specific work, I think is important as well. Even though we've been doing this work for a while, there still seems to feel like it's new, we're still learning, we're still kind of paddling in a lot of different areas, but it really has to do that we haven't created a specific space and platform to be concentrated on moving the needle with this equity lens. So I think it is safe to say we are in a new space, but we do have the baseline of having at least data to start, having folks that have been doing this work for a while and are looking just to do it better and more effectively. And now we need money to fund positions that are going to be able to concentrate on this work. And I think that you address the capacity issue there, and you're also able to address the implementation, because getting the train out of the station is where we're struggling. And if we start investing in that piece of the puzzle, I think this is where we're going to start to see the work grow along.
Great, thank you, everybody. We do have had somebody who has had her hand up for a little while, so I just want to make sure we take her as the last question. Could we unmute Tiffany Alicia? And Tiffany, can you just introduce yourself and say your comment quickly?
Okay, I'll try to be as quick as possible. Thank you for having us here for this important summit. My name is Tiffany Alicia, and I'm the founder and president of Black and Brown Wall Street in Springfield, Massachusetts. And we were an organization based off of a reactionary effort, because last year during COVID-19, a lot of our Black and Brown businesses could not access the various grants and funding and relief because of different reasons, from not having the correct legal entities to not being aware or not being able to write a grant application and things of that matter. So we've worked with over almost 200 Black and Brown businesses within the 18 months we've been operating. And we've seen a spectrum of needs, from, like Catherine said, needing an email address and a tax ID number, to grant writing efforts. And with all that being said, there's two things that have been brought up constantly that I kind of will have questions surrounding. One of them is in terms of this shift that we're moving towards the creative economy. That is going to take a lot of education, as well as a lot of a psychological transition from a labor based system to this idea of cognitive development skills. Your creativity matters. You can invest in your ideas. That's a whole transition that our community has to make on the adult level, as well as on the youth level and the educational basis. So what's the efforts going into not only giving you the financial literacy education, but preparing us emotionally, mentally to even engage in that realm? Because there's a lot of trauma from systemic racism and discrimination involved in interacting with the infrastructure, with the business communities and things like that nature. In Springfield, some of our community doesn't even go downtown because there's so much trauma in other sectors. So how are we going to not only educate our communities on financial literacy and help them implement them, as well as the battling the psychological trauma? And then lastly, there was continuous mention of collaboration, specifically with people on the ground like myself. And I think it's absolutely amazing that so many multi-million-dollar and huge corporations and different organizations want to work with grassroots efforts, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out that oftentimes grassroots organizers are approached and they are told that they're needed and they're essential to this work, but then the compensation is just not there. And that really, really invests in burnout for all of us in the terms where you're asking us to do countless hours of research, and it took us years to build our network and build our businesses efforts. And then you just want us to give it to you for the greater good, which is, we understand, we have hearts, but it also takes a lot, and it takes a toll on the sustainability of our efforts. And in Springfield, it is like a cycle of this program jumps up, but then it's gone the next year, or this person is ready to lead and then you can't hear from her. How do we make sure, as we're establishing ourselves as a creative economy commonwealth, basically, that we're ensuring that our leaders on all levels, not just the fancy multi-million-dollar budgets, but the ones that are putting in hours after we put our kids to sleep to make sure our community is okay? How do we ensure that they're successful, not just now, but for the future?
Thank you, Tiffany. You've just opened up like a whole box of worms. So I don't think, unfortunately, we can address it, but I would invite all of the panelists and other attendees to respond in the chat if you can. We do have to go to a couple of our legislators who are here on the webinar. Let me thank all of you for your questions and your input. This is going to be just the beginning of a conversation. It's so important. I'd like to welcome the co-chairs of the Gateway Cities Legislative Caucus, State Senator Eric Lesser, State Representative Antonio Cabral, who both co-filed a bill to promote inclusive entrepreneurship and economic justice, which includes many of the recommendations from our latest MassINC report. Senator Lesser, I think you're up first, so please take it away.
Well, thanks so much, Andre. Can everybody hear me okay? Everybody can see me okay? Great. So just again, want to thank MassINC. That you've been such leaders for years, really, for over a decade on gateway cities and on lifting these issues up. And I want to thank my co-chair, Rep. Cabral, who is the original co-chair of the Gateway Cities Caucus. Hi, Tiffany. Not that we pick favorites, but we do have someone from Springfield on. I just want to also give a very special thank you to Ben and to Juana for your leadership. And I want to just give a shout out to my former colleague from the Senate, Senator Linda Dracena-Fori, who was a great friend and has been a great champion of these issues for a long time. Look, we can't talk about equality, about equity, about civil rights without talking about entrepreneurship and without talking about the need to help create and stimulate entrepreneurship and wealth creation in Black and Brown communities, and in particular in our 26 gateway cities throughout Massachusetts. We're in the midst, in the Gateway Cities Caucus, of doing a tour of all of our gateway cities. We've done 2 days so far of these tours. We were recently in Malden and in Revere and in Chelsea. And then just last week, we were in Lawrence and Methuen and Lowell. And it's clear when you visit our gateway cities, when you go into neighborhoods, when you talk to community leaders, that the path out of COVID, the path towards greater equity, greater justice, the path, frankly, towards righting the wrongs of generations of racism and neglect in our gateway cities and in our minority communities is through fostering and promoting inclusive entrepreneurship. And it starts with small businesses, the most small businesses, the micro businesses that anchor neighborhoods, that anchor blocks, and create upward mobility for families. And that's what Rep. Cabral and my bill is all about. We've worked closely with MassINC and with the Gateway Cities Initiative and the Gateway Cities Caucus to put together an inclusive entrepreneurship plan from top to bottom, putting local business, putting entrepreneurship, putting minority empowerment around economic matters at the center of the state's economic policies. So we've got to get it done. We will hopefully have another economic development bill coming soon, and we will certainly be pushing to include it in that, but we can get elements of it done before that also, including in the COVID recovery funds that the legislature is going to be working through throughout the summer and through the fall. So just want to thank everyone for their work, for their leadership and inspiration, and just want to say, you know, we got to get this done in law. We've got to get it written into the Mass General laws so that we can continue to build opportunity for our gateway cities and our communities. So thank you so much. And with that, I think I'm pitching it over to my colleague, Chair Cabral.
Well, good morning, Senator Lesser. Good morning to everyone. This has been a great discussion, a great panel. Let me begin by thanking my former colleague, Juana Matias, and Ben and Andre, great partners for the Gateway Cities Legislative Caucus, for pulling together this distinguished group of panelists to talk about the importance of building an inclusive economy. The pandemic has challenged all of us in ways we never expected, but it also exposed the deep inequities that exist across every facet of our society. As we work to recover and renew our economy, and finally have an administration in DC that seems to understand the importance of lifting up all Americans, we have an unprecedented opportunity to channel this energy in a way that can promote entrepreneurship in communities that have been overlooked or struggle to find committed investors. It's the time to be innovative, inclusive, and forward-thinking. Senator Lesser and I have filed legislation working with MassINC and other partners, titled an act to promote inclusive entrepreneurship and economic justice, to do just that. The bill is meant to serve as a holistic approach to inclusive entrepreneurship and engagement. We want to ensure that our state's approach to economic development is adapted and is critiqued through an economic justice lens. First and foremost, we want to collect data of importance, whether it be how much state money is going towards business owners of color or the full picture of online lending practices. And this is like what I heard Aaron Vega as well talk about the ability to have what's called high-risk loans to small business. I think that's also important. We also want to tap into tools that already exist, like business improvement districts, but make them more effective for entrepreneurs of color and other minorities. We need to look at programs like the Futures Fund with the Black Economic Development Council of Massachusetts, which channels investments to minority-owned and operated businesses to compensate for the historic lack of institutional financing support, to be a model for how to move forward. I am trying to launch a similar style program for Portuguese immigrant small businesses in the South Coast in particular, which face a lot of the same challenges. Inclusion is particularly important for gateway cities as our population are more diverse, yet often our institutional leaders, mayors, bankers, businessmen, and teachers are still very much white men. Last Friday, Senator Lesser and I visited Lowell and Lawrence and also Methuen as part of our Gateway Cities tours, where 75% of school children and hospital patients are people of color, often English language learners. In both cities, the school system and the hospital system are struggling to survive and meet the need of their community, of their communities. We need to put a spotlight on these inequities. That is partially why Senator Lesser and I are committed to the Gateway City Tours. We plan to visit as many of the 26 cities in our caucus over the course of the summer and fall as we can. Our next stop is the South Coast, including my hometown of New Bedford. Our cities have much in common, but there are nuances of difference that need to be seen, sometimes to be believed, which is why it's so important that we visit and give the people in each city the opportunity to show us what they are about and give us a real hands-on experience. With folks like you and MassINC and the Institute at MassINC doing the research and analysis, and Senator Lesser and I with our colleagues going out in the trenches, I am confident that working together, we will be able to make real progress and see our inclusive entrepreneurship goals become a reality. Once again, thank you to all of you. A special thank you to MassINC and for all the work they've done in this area, and especially all the work they've done with the Gateway Cities Caucus. We really are very appreciative. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Senator Lesser and Representative Cabral. The Gateway Cities Legislative Caucus provides an essential voice and leadership on Beacon Hill on behalf of our smaller cities, and we couldn't do any of this work without you. I also want to thank all of our speakers today, Delana, Ben, our panelists, Glenn, Linda, Alex, and Catherine, for all of your contributions. And thank you, of course, to you and the audience for joining today's event. All the materials presented today will be available on our website, on MassINC's website later today, along with the recording of this webinar. Make sure to follow our social media accounts and subscribe to our email to register for our next event, the Gateway Cities Innovation Institute Awards and Summit in September. And before finalizing and saying goodbye, I just want to thank our sponsors once again for their support. Without you, this event just wouldn't have been possible. Thanks again. Have a wonderful day, everyone.